This is problem 8C on the practice problems for test number 1. A student took out 2 loans for tuition and fees totaling $3,000. One of the loans charged 8% annual interest and the other charged 6% annual interest. After 1 year, the total interest owed on the 2 loans was $214. How much did the student borrow at each rate? First thing we're going to do is define some variables. I look to the question, how much did the student borrow at each rate, to decide what my variables are supposed to represent. So we have 2 different loans that we took out, so we're going to let 2 variables here equal the amount that we took out at each rate. We've got the 8% and we've got the 6%. I'm going to call them the high and low interest rates. So L and H are going to be the variables that I use. So H is going to be the amount borrowed at 8%, H for high, and L is going to be the amount borrowed at 6%. L for low. You're welcome to use X and Y, but I think using letters that stand for the variables a little bit better than X and Y might be easier in the grand scheme of things. Okay, so now we need some equations. First thing I see is that the 2 loans totaled $3,000. So we borrowed H dollars at the high interest rate, L dollars at the low interest rate. Total is 3,000. So that equation is H plus L equals 3,000. Next thing we see is that after 1 year, the interest owed was $214. So I know something's going to equal 214 because that's how much interest I owed on both loans. This equation's tougher to find, I think. So here's our basic fact. The interest, when you borrow money for 1 year, is equal to the principal times the interest rate. So what we'll do is figure out how much interest we owed for each of the 2 loans separately. So we know that the high loan, we paid 8% interest. So the interest rate is at 0.08. Remember to convert interest rates as percentages, convert them into decimals. So that's the rate, and then that gets multiplied by the principal, the amount of money that we actually borrowed, and how much did we borrow at that high interest rate, H. And I think that's why I prefer using H and L instead of X and Y. Because right away I can tell, oh, 8% goes with H, as opposed to, well, which one does 8% go with, the X or the Y? And then we borrowed separately at 6% interest, so we have a 0.06 times the principal for the lower interest rate was L. And these 2 expressions separately, this is how much interest you owe on the high interest rate loan, that's how much interest you owe on the low interest rate loan. The total is 214, so what should I do with these 2 expressions? We're supposed to add them up. So here are my 2 equations. Now the first equation looks pretty good to me, but the second equation has all these decimals in them, in it, and I don't want to have those decimals. So I'm going to multiply everything in the second equation by 100 just to get rid of all the decimals. Multiplying by 100, remember, moves the decimal point over 2 places to the right. So that decimal point will go over to there and just become 0.8, or better yet, 8. So this becomes 8H plus 0.06 times 100 is 6. Copy the L. 214 times 100, move the decimal place 2 to the right, which brings 2 zeros into the mix, 21,400. I'll just recopy the equation from here. H plus L is equal to 3,000. So now it's looking much more friendly to me without those decimals. So you can either use substitution or elimination. I'll go ahead and use substitution here. I'm going to solve the bottom equation because it looks easier to me. I'll solve it for H. You could just as well solve for L. So H is 3,000 minus L. And then we're going to copy the top equation. But instead of H, we're going to put this thing in green. So 8 times H, which I don't know yet, plus 6L is equal to 21,400. And then here in green, instead of H, 3,000 minus L. Okay, that equation is looking good. It's got only one variable, just L. So we're not too far from the end of this one. Distribute the 8. 24,000 minus 8L plus 6L equals 21,400. Combine like terms, 24,000 minus 2L is equal to 21,400. Subtract 24,000 from both sides. We get negative 2L is negative 2,600. Divide both sides by negative 2. And it turns out L is 1,300. And then to find H, best thing to do is find the equation that says H equals, which is this one here in the top in green. H is 3,000 minus L. And we just figured out L was 1,300, so 3,000 minus 1,300 tells me that L is 2,700. So our final answer here is that we borrowed 1,300 at the low interest rate, which I'm just going to go back to the percentage that was given, 6%. And we borrowed 2,700. That is not right. So cross that off. 1,700. So we borrowed 1,700 at the high interest rate because that was H, and the high interest rate was 8%.